And where were you on the day and night of April 17th, 1906? If you were President Theodore Roosevelt in the middle of your second term, you were fighting for conservation and against monopolies and trusts. If you were among the rich or the daring, you probably were purchasing your first motor car. A flashy sports car, perhaps. Or maybe a Stanley steamer. Or perhaps you were having trouble with your Jackson. Or maybe you had a Knox truck for your growing family. Whatever you favored, the commuter rush was on, even in 1906. If you were out for a day in Marin County, you might have been taking a ride down the crookedest railroad in the world, the Mount Tamalpais Muir Woods Railway. 281 sharp curves in 8 miles of track, arriving at the boom town of Mill Valley. If you were a newcomer to San Francisco, probably the first thing you'd do would be to take a cable car ride down Market Street, where it was every man, woman, and horse for himself. You'd ride past the famous Palace Hotel, where, if you were Enrico Caruso, you were preparing to sing that night at the San Francisco Opera House. And that evening, if you weren't among the 3,000 lucky ticket holders to see and hear Caruso, perhaps you dined at a fashionable San Francisco restaurant. Or maybe you were dancing on Nob Hill. Or perhaps you were having a domestic problem in your Pacific Heights home. If you were Ed Gleason, you were a cub reporter for the San Francisco News, covering a hot story on the San Francisco waterfront. And if you were one of the 400,000 San Franciscans, or one of thousands of Northern Californians, you probably went to bed that night, comfortable and happy in the boom times of the day, totally unaware that the seemingly secure earth beneath you was primed for disaster. If you were San Francisco News reporter Ed Gleason, you were thrown out of bed by what was to be the biggest news story of any reporter's lifetime.
As I hit the floor, I thought I was having a nightmare. Then I thought our home had blown up. I raced outside with the rest of the family, where the whole neighborhood stood in their nightclothes.
The quake only lasted 65 seconds. After the roaring, there was a strange silence, except for some church bells still clanging wildly. Then came the first of many aftershocks. But like thousands of other San Franciscans, reporter Gleason got dressed and rushed down into the heart of the city.
I was headed for our newspaper office, as were many other folk going to their places of business. But most of the thousands who rushed down into the city by foot, and a few by car, were, believe it or not, sightseers. Everyone thought the worst was over, and frankly, they were happy just to be alive. Oh, there was smoke where some fires had started, but everybody thought our fire department, one of the best in the country, would soon have things under control. Sightseers talked and joked and exchanged experiences about what had happened to each of them when the quake hit. There was almost a carnival atmosphere in many parts of town.
One section of town, the wholesale produce district, wasn't sharing the carnival atmosphere. It had been the only area open for business when the quake hit. Max Wolfen reached it just after 6 in the morning.
The street had sunk in front of some of the produce buildings, and I could look right into the basement of some of them.
Reporter Gleason reached his newspaper office just after 6:15 in the morning and found it in a shambles.
My editor told me to go out and get every story I could, and that we would print the newspaper somehow, somewhere that day. As I raced along Mission Street, I saw a fire engine company starting to fight the fire. Fireman Rudolph Schubert of Engine Company 38 recalls what happened.
My outfit, Engine Company 38, was in the thick of it. Fire Chief Sullivan was mortally wounded, so we had lost a valuable leader. When we went to turn on the fire hoses, we were horrified to find that most of the water mains had been destroyed. So there we were, a burning city and no water.
A burning city and virtually no water. Only a pitiful amount of water from the sewers, from a few mains, and some pumped from the bay would be available during the gruesome days ahead. By 9 in the morning, most of the area south of Market was either burned or burning, and the sightseers suddenly realized that the party was over, that perhaps the entire city would burn to the ground. Mayor Schmitz issued his proclamation that all looters would be shot on sight and telegraphed for aid from throughout the country. The Army, under command of General Frederick Funston, had moved into key parts of the city. Reporter Gleason was north of Market, a few blocks from the ferry building, just after 10 in the morning, as Company B from the Presidio took charge of the area.
By this time, as the fire spread, people were trying to save anything they could. Tens of thousands of dollars were evacuated and carried by hand through the burning city, including a vegetable cart loaded with money and driven down the peninsula by a Mr. A.P. Giannini. The soldiers, keeping just a step ahead of the fire, ordered people to withdraw for their own safety. And working hand in hand with the soldiers were the San Francisco police, including policeman Henry Smith.
We only had about 600 policemen at that time. Not nearly enough for such a disaster. And the Army really saved our skins.
By 11 in the morning of the 18th, not only south of Market, but also large sections of north of Market were burning. One fire was spreading from the produce market to the financial district. Another fire, started by a woman cooking breakfast in her Hayes Street home, was raging in the northwest section. The flames spread rapidly from building to building, from street to street, from district to district. One famed landmark after another succumbed to the rampaging fire. The Emporium, the Hearst Building, the Opera House. By noon, the Call Building was burning dramatically, one floor at a time, from top to bottom. By mid-afternoon, down burned San Francisco's most cherished possession, the Palace Hotel. Reporter Gleason had joined his editor and fellow reporters at an improvised newspaper office.
We ran off the paper by hand. The Army was dynamiting buildings up the street to try to halt the spread of the fire, and the blasting shook our building. We ran off the only paper printed in San Francisco on that April 18th.
On the afternoon and evening of the 18th, a great exodus began from the burning city. Many people left by ferry to join relatives elsewhere, but thousands were evacuating their homes and offices to go to the western portions of San Francisco. Sylvan Lisberger recalls the sights and sounds of that first evening, as 250,000 men, women, and children sought safety.
Never as long as I live will I forget the sights on the streets of San Francisco that night. The area northwest of Stockton Street was largely residential, and after the fire jumped across Market Street, the people, of course, had to move out. The Army had taken over all the policing in that area. A group of soldiers would go through every building and house 1 or 2 blocks ahead of the fire, thoroughly search every room and corner to see that everyone was out. Men, women, children, the sick and the incapacitated, the dogs, the cats, the birds, and all other pets were moved out, even if they were unable to walk. Whatever household goods the people could take were piled on baby carriages, tables, chairs, sofa, children's wagons, and anything that had wheels on it, even the small beds. The father, the mother, and the sturdier of the children would hitch rope sheets to themselves, and they would tow the vehicles loaded with the family possessions up the street. The noise of those scraping boxes, the casters of the beds and couches, and the chairs as they were dragged along the street is one that I can still hear. It was a sight that beggars description. Here on the street and on the lawns, babies were delivered into the world. Other babies were nursed. The older folks were rested if they hadn't already collapsed. The children were fed, and life in every phase, and literally from the cradle to the grave, was an open sight.
And in the days and nights to come, one area, Golden Gate Park, was to be home for over 100,000 San Franciscans. On that first evening, April 18th, reporter Gleason was sent to Golden Gate Park to report the spirit of the refugees.
It was an eerie sight. The smoke billowed thousands of feet into the sky, which was brightened by flames for miles around. There was no real panic, but everyone was worried. What if the fire couldn't be checked? What if it crossed Van Ness Avenue? What if it reached the park? Our backs were to the sea. It was almost like watching a movie serial, wondering if we would become a part of a drastic climax. Mrs. Naomi Wise was typical of the Golden Gate refugees.
I put my 1-year-old daughter and my 2-year-old son into a wash basket, and my sister and I carried them in the wash basket out to Golden Gate Park. Everybody in San Francisco seemed to be there. We slept there with just a few blankets to keep us all warm, and we watched the city burn on and on into the night.
Throughout the night and into the morning of the 19th, the fire burned closer and closer toward Golden Gate Park. It was hoped that Union Square would stop the flames, but the fire jumped Powell Street and moved on past Nob Hill, burning scores of great mansions filled with millions of dollars of furniture and art treasures. In its wake, the fire had leveled Chinatown. Ching Hua Lee was one of those burned out.
Because most of the homes were made of wood, Chinatown burned completely to the ground. 10,000 of my people were homeless. There's an old Chinese legend that on the last day of the world, a yellow bull will appear during the quick-and fire. As we were leaving our homes, a tin ox broke loose from one of the wagons that was going toward Hunter's Point. And when we all saw that ox, we thought it was the yellow bull and that the end of the world was here.
Many did think it might be the end of the world. And if not that, there were other rumors spreading throughout the country. Joe Frank heard them in Quincy.
By evening, the rumors about San Francisco were frightening. We heard that a tidal wave had completely destroyed the city. Another story had it that the entire city had burned to the ground. To people like myself, with folks in San Francisco, the rumors were terrifying.
On the morning of the 19th, everyone realized that Van Ness Avenue was the city's last hope to save San Francisco from complete destruction. Reporter Gleason was at Van Ness, covering one of the most dramatic scenes in American history.
All the fires were converging on Van Ness. Backfires had been set all along the eastern side of Van Ness in hopes of preventing the fire from jumping the street. For the next 24 hours, this last-ditch fight was waged. Rudolph Schubert and Engine Company 38 now took on the fire at Van Ness.
My company had to cover an 11-block front. We relayed hose lines from the bay along Van Ness Avenue. The fire did cross Van Ness at some points, but we put out those fires. We fought with everything we had, including our bare hands. We finally held the fire at Van Ness, and part of the city was saved.
By Friday the 20th, the fire was slowed down, and by Saturday the 21st, the fire had been checked. But its toll was shocking. Much of San Francisco was in ruins. Over 450 dead, an estimated $500 million lost, and over 28,000 buildings destroyed. And not only San Francisco, but also a vast area of Northern California, from Santa Rosa to Stanford to Santa Cruz, had been devastated. And all from a 65-second shift of the San Andreas fault. During the first days after the fire, refugee camps sprung up throughout San Francisco, supervised by the Army, by the police, by the Red Cross, and by special civic committees. Dan Koshlin recalls these first days.
Our home was on a main thoroughfare between the burning city and the Presidio. So we must have seen over 100,000 people pass by our home on their way to the refugee camps. And the thing I'll always remember is that the people were smiling. I didn't see a single person crying or upset. They all were in the same boat, and were confident that everything would come out all right in the end. We had a German cook who got all upset during the quake. In fact, she was speechless with fright. So we bedecked her with all the beautiful family jewels and sent her out to relax in one of the camps. Now, a special, elaborate tent had been reserved for one of the matrons of San Francisco society, in fact, the leading lady of that society. And when the authorities saw this German cook coming along with all the jewels, they mistook her for the society lady, and they wined and dined her for 3 days before her real identity was discovered.
Reporter Gleason, having written about death and destruction, now had good news to report.
Aid came from everywhere. Within a few days, over $8 million was raised in American cities. Tons of relief supplies poured in. Foreign countries contributed nearly $500,000 in relief, with over half of that coming from Japan. Approximately 160 relief stations were set up throughout the city. Mrs. Henry Robert Braden was typical of the social workers I interviewed at this time.
There had been rumors to the effect that there were all sorts of epidemics prevailing, that there was looting and terrorism. This we found to be quite untrue. People were cooking their meals outside their tents. Everyone was in good spirits. Everyone helped everyone else. When a new baby arrived, the neighbors pitched in and helped the mother. Meals were served to dozens of people at a time at 15 cents a meal. Finally, the Red Cross sent out trained workers to supervise the work in the camps.
San Franciscans were planning and constructing new buildings almost as fast as they had burned down. Reporter Gleason wrote about the recovery.
Everyone seemed to cry, "The city is dead. Long live the city." Songs and signs eloquently demonstrated the city's vitality. Everyone pitched in. Safes were hauled up from the ruins, and whether you called it cold cash or hot, it was desperately needed. Demolition teams blasted away dangerous shells of buildings. Workers cleaned away debris. Freight cars carried the debris out of the city. Many folks were back at work immediately.
San Francisco firms, large and small, came back strong, and reporter Gleason was there to write about it.
The quake and fire was quite a story for a cub reporter, but for the next 40 years, San Francisco was to be my beat as a full-fledged reporter and eventually as managing editor of the Call. I saw and reported my city completely rebuild itself within 3 years, and 6 years after that, host a World's Fair. I saw and reported my city build everything from Hetch Hetchy Dam in the wilderness of Yosemite to a Golden Gate Bridge in the wilderness of the sea. But I never saw it looking better than it did the week of April 18, 1906, bruised and battered, but ready to fight back.